I never imagined a neighborhood could look so perfect and still hide so much stupidity underneath. When I first moved into Willow Creek Estates, I thought I'd made it. Clean sidewalks, friendly neighbors, not a single trash can out of place. The kind of place where people waved just to prove they weren't miserable. The HOA brochure promised organized living and harmonious aesthetics. Sounded fancy. I figured that meant well-kept lawns and maybe a few rules about fence height. What it actually meant was that a woman named Karen ruled the place like a suburban dictator with a clipboard. I met her on my second day. She walked up my driveway in heels on concrete, and introduced herself as President Karen of the Willow Creek HOA. I remember she said it the same way a general might introduce himself before declaring war. She smiled, looked around at my boxes stacked in the garage, then said, "Welcome, we value order and beauty here." I told her I was a former volunteer firefighter and I'd moved here for peace and quiet. Her smile froze. "Oh," she said, "how interesting." I should have known right then that interesting was HOA language for "we'll be watching you." A week later, I got my first taste of what order and beauty meant. I was out mowing the lawn when Karen stopped her golf cart in front of my house. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring hard at the fire hydrant on the corner. It was a bright red hydrant, standard city issue, nothing wrong with it. But she sat there, squinting at it like it was a personal insult. Finally, she pointed at it and said, "That hydrant completely clashes with the neighborhood color palette." I thought she was joking. I laughed and said, "Well, I don't think the fire department takes design requests." She didn't laugh. She wrote something on her clipboard and said, "I'll take care of it." Then she drove off. I didn't think much of it until the following Tuesday morning. I woke up to the sound of metal tools clanging outside. When I looked out my window, there were two guys in safety vests unbolting the fire hydrant from the sidewalk. I threw on my shoes and ran outside. "Hey, what are you doing?" One of the workers shrugged and said, "HOA order. We were told this one's being removed for maintenance." Maintenance? I looked around. There were no cones, no city vehicles, no fire department insignia, just two guys in a truck with no markings. I called the HOA office immediately, and the assistant on the phone said, "Yes, the board decided the hydrants were unnecessary on private roads. They ruin the neighborhood's visual harmony." I actually laughed out loud. "You're telling me," I said, "that you removed fire hydrants because they're ugly?" She said, "That's correct, sir," like she was reciting a grocery list. I couldn't even find the words. I just hung up and stood there staring at the patch of dirt where the hydrant used to be. A few minutes later, Karen drove by again. She slowed her golf cart and smiled. "Looks better already, doesn't it?" That was the first time I realized something was seriously wrong with this place. That evening, I walked around the block. Every single hydrant in the neighborhood gone. Just a few capped-off pipes sticking up out of the ground like broken bones. I took pictures. I didn't know what I was going to do with them yet, but I had a gut feeling I'd need them someday. At the next HOA meeting, I brought it up. Karen was sitting at the front table, her nameplate shining under the fluorescent lights. I raised my hand and said, "Removing fire hydrants isn't just ridiculous, it's dangerous. What happens if there's a fire?" She smiled, that fake calm smile of hers. "We have a sprinkler system in every home," she said. "And besides, statistically speaking, house fires here are very rare." "Yeah," I said, "until they're not." A few people chuckled, most didn't. They just looked down at their papers, pretending not to be involved. That's what living under an HOA does to people. It turns them into quiet bystanders. When the meeting ended, Karen came up to me and said, "You seem very concerned, Mr. Carter. Maybe Willow Creek isn't the best fit for you if you don't appreciate our values." I said, "Lady, your values just made it impossible for a fire truck to do its job." She tilted her head. "Then let's hope there's never a fire." And that was it. The arrogance in her tone hit me like a slap. That night, as I sat on my porch, I couldn't stop thinking about that line. Let's hope there's never a fire. I didn't know it then, but in a few short months, that line would come back to haunt her. Because one night, When the sky turned black and thunder rolled over Willow Creek, that hope ran out. I learned fast that in Willow Creek, Corinne's word was law. If she said the mailboxes were too shiny, you'd better dull them down by morning. If she thought your lawn was an inch too tall, you'd get a violation notice before your mower cooled off. It was like living in a movie set where everyone was terrified of the director. After the fire hydrant fiasco, I tried to lay low. I told myself I'd stay quiet, mind my business, and just enjoy my house. But you can't ignore a woman like Corinne for long. She had a radar for rebellion. One afternoon, I came home to find a bright orange slip taped to my door. It read, "Friendly reminder, vehicles must not obstruct aesthetic flow." I stared at my old blue pickup truck parked neatly in the driveway and realized that was her polite way of saying, "I don't like your truck." The next morning, I saw her parked across the street in her golf cart, snapping pictures of my house with her phone like she was collecting evidence for a crime scene. I walked over and asked, "Something wrong?" She smiled that practiced HOA smile and said, "Oh no, dear. We're just reviewing compliance for the community's visual harmony report." "Visual harmony," I repeated. "Right, and where do fire hydrants fit in your harmony chart?" Her smile tightened. "The board made that decision collectively," she said, which I later learned meant she made it, and everyone else nodded because they were too scared to argue. Corinne had moved on to her next big dream, a project she called the Willow Creek Lifestyle Center. A fancy name for what was basically a big clubhouse with a gym, a pool, and a wine lounge where she could host meetings and pretend she was running a country club instead of a cul-de-sac. At first, I didn't care. If people wanted to waste their HOA fees on overpriced furniture and yoga mats, that was their business. But then came the special assessment notice. Every homeowner was required to pay an extra $2,000 for construction costs. I asked if that included new hydrants or any kind of fire protection for the building. Corinne waved her hand like I'd mentioned something vulgar. "We already have sprinklers installed," she said. "There's no need for ugly hydrants ruining the landscaping. The center will be state-of-the-art and visually seamless." That phrase, visually seamless, started popping up everywhere. It was in emails, newsletters, even on the construction signs. I swear, if she could have paved over the sky to match her beige color palette, she would have. Weeks went by and the clubhouse began to take shape. The construction crew worked long hours, sometimes late into the evening. I noticed something odd one night when I was walking my dog. The sprinkler lines they were running didn't connect to the city's main water grid. They were tied into a private reservoir system meant for irrigation, the same one that watered everyone's lawns. I asked one of the workers about it and he shrugged. "We just follow the plans, man." So I brought it up at the next HOA meeting. I stood up and said, "If there's a fire, those sprinklers won't have the pressure to do anything. You're building a clubhouse out of matchsticks." Corinne tapped her pen on the table. "Mr. Carter," she said, "we appreciate your enthusiasm for safety, but perhaps you should let professionals handle professional matters." I could hear a couple of neighbors chuckle behind me. I wanted to tell them that I'd seen more burned-down houses than Corinne had seen cups of coffee, but I let it go. I just sat back down and stared at the ridiculous painting of the clubhouse design hanging behind her. It showed happy families, green grass, and not a single hydrant in sight. As the meeting ended, Corinne stopped me at the door. "You really should try to be more positive about our progress," she said. "Negativity spreads." "Fire spreads too," I told her, "faster than you think." Her smile faltered for a split second. "We'll be fine," she said quietly. But I could tell she didn't believe it. Not really. By the time construction was finished, the place looked exactly like the digital render: beige walls, spotless windows, perfect landscaping. It was the kind of building that screamed, "Look, but don't touch." The grand opening was scheduled for mid-July, and Corinne sent out embossed invitations like she was hosting the Oscars. Everyone was buzzing about it. The HOA newsletter called it a new era for Willow Creek. I just kept thinking about those disconnected sprinklers and the missing hydrants. I even called the local fire department again. The guy on the line recognized my voice. "Sir," he said, We've noted your concerns, but unless there's an active violation or emergency, we can't intervene. It's private property." "Yeah," I said, "private until someone's house catches fire." He sighed, "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." Hope, everyone kept using that word like it was a safety plan. Karen hoped it would never rain too hard. The city hoped the HOA would follow the rules. And I hoped that when this whole mess inevitably went up in smoke, it wouldn't take the rest of us with it. I remember walking past the clubhouse the night before the opening ceremony. The lights were still on, and I could see Karen inside, standing in the middle of the lobby, admiring the place like she'd just built a palace. She turned and saw me through the window. For a second our eyes met. She smiled and waved, confident and proud, like nothing in the world could touch her creation. But even from outside, I could smell the faint odor of fresh wiring and varnish, a dangerous mix waiting for one bad spark. And as I walked home through the quiet streets of Willow Creek, I couldn't shake the thought that sooner or later, this neighborhood's obsession with perfection was going to burn. It didn't take long for me to realize that talking sense into the Willow Creek HOA was like trying to teach logic to a brick wall. Karen's little kingdom ran on ego, not reason. After the grand opening of the clubhouse, she strutted around like she'd built the Taj Mahal herself. There were photo ops, champagne flutes, and a plaque at the entrance that said "Visionary Leadership by President Karen Whitmore." I wish I was joking. Everyone acted impressed, though most were pretending. I could see it in their faces. The clubhouse was fancy, sure, new gym equipment, a heated pool, expensive furniture, but underneath the polish, people were tired. The HOA fees kept climbing, the rules got stricter, and Karen's attitude made everyone feel like they were living in a gated dictatorship. For me, the breaking point came when I noticed something wrong with the emergency access gate. It had been locked for weeks, supposedly to maintain privacy for the clubhouse visitors. That gate was the only route large enough for fire trucks to get through if something ever happened. I brought it up at the next meeting. Karen sat at the head of the table, flipping through a binder like she was reviewing national security plans. "Karen," I said, "that gate by the clubhouse, why's it been locked shut? That's supposed to stay open for emergency vehicles." Without looking up, she said, "We had people cutting through to the back road. It's an HOA matter, not an emergency concern." "It will be if someone's house catches fire," I said. She finally looked up, her eyes sharp. "Mr. Carter, not every conversation has to involve a fire. Perhaps you're projecting your old job a little too much into this community." I wanted to tell her that fire doesn't care about job titles, but what was the point? The room was full of nodding heads. People didn't want to deal with her, they just wanted peace. So I sat back down and decided to start covering myself. That night I began gathering everything, photos of the missing hydrants, screenshots of the HOA's emails, and copies of the minutes where I'd raised concerns. I even printed them out and stuck them in a folder labeled for when it all burns down. My wife thought I was being paranoid. Maybe I was. But in my line of work, paranoia is just another word for preparation. A few weeks later, something strange happened. The local fire department called me. The chief himself, a guy named Daniels, said he'd received an anonymous tip that hydrants had been removed illegally in Willow Creek. I told him everything, how they were taken out, how the HOA blocked the gates, and how they tied the sprinklers to the irrigation system. He sounded frustrated but careful. "We've looked into it, Carter," he said. "The thing is, because it's private property, enforcement gets tricky. Unless there's a life safety hazard right now, we can't force changes." "So what, you're waiting for someone to die before you act?" I asked. He sighed. "That's the law, not me. I'll log the complaint. That's the best I can do for now." I hung up, angry but not surprised. That's how Karen got away with everything she played just inside the gray areas. Every dumb decision she made hid behind some technical loophole. Still, I figured the least I could do was keep warning people. I started bringing it up casually when neighbors were out walking dogs or mowing lawns. Most of them looked around before whispering back, "Yeah, I know, it's crazy." But no one wanted to confront her. Then one night, I found something that made my stomach drop. I was walking past the clubhouse when I noticed a utility workers panel open near the foundation. A faint buzzing sound came from inside exposed wiring, half covered with insulation. It was probably left open after the last inspection. I took a photo, shut the panel, and emailed the HOA immediately. The next morning, I got a response. Dear Mr. Carter, thank you for your concern. Please refrain from tampering with HOA property in the future. We will handle maintenance matters internally. That was it. No thank you, no follow-up. Just another warning for trying to help. 2 days later, Karen stopped me while I was checking my mail. She leaned out of her golf cart, sunglasses on, her tone sugar sweet. You know, she said, people are starting to feel anxious because of all your alarmist talk. Maybe try to relax a bit, enjoy the community. I looked her dead in the eye. Karen, the community's gonna burn if you don't fix this mess. She smirked, then we'll make sure it burns beautifully. And she drove off, humming to herself like nothing was wrong. After that, I stopped talking. I'd done my part. The warnings were out there. I couldn't force sense into people who valued curb appeal over common sense. But deep down, I had this gnawing feeling, a slow, cold dread that kept me up at night. Because in every fire department training video I'd ever watched, there was always one line that stuck with me. Disasters don't start with fire. They start with neglect. And in Willow Creek, neglect was written all over every spotless lawn and empty hydrant post. I didn't know when or how, but I knew something was coming. You could feel it in the air like a storm that hadn't formed yet, but was already gathering on the horizon. And when it finally hit, no one, not even Karen, was going to be ready. It started on a Thursday, the kind of night that tricks you into thinking the world is peaceful. The air was still, the lake was glass, and every porch light in Willow Creek glowed the same warm gold that made the neighborhood look like a brochure for luxury country living. Around 11:30 p.m., I was sitting on my porch with a mug of coffee, sorting through some papers. The sky was clear. Crickets chirped. My wife had gone to bed hours ago. Then, somewhere across the lake, I saw it, a flicker of orange. At first, I thought it was a bonfire. Some of the younger families like to host late-night gatherings near the clubhouse. But then the flicker grew, it pulsed. The reflection on the water shifted from orange to angry red. My stomach sank. I grabbed my flashlight and sprinted down the hill toward the main road. That's when I heard the first scream. By the time I rounded the bend near the clubhouse, I saw it. The new structure, Karen's pride and joy, was on fire. Flames crawled up the wooden beams, licking through the balcony, shattering windows with popping sounds that echoed across the valley. Smoke poured into the sky like a signal flare. People were spilling out of nearby houses, barefoot and terrified. A few tried using garden hoses, but the pressure was pitiful. The water sputtered like it didn't want to come out. That's when I realized the sprinklers were running on the irrigation line. They weren't pulling from the main hydrant system. Karen came running down the road in a silk robe, screaming orders. Call 911, someone get water. She was waving her phone like it was a magic wand that could fix it all. But when the first fire truck arrived, the real nightmare began. The driver jumped out, hooked the line to the nearest hydrant, and nothing came out. The entire crew froze. Where's your water pressure? The lieutenant yelled. I was already running toward him. They capped the hydrants last year. The HOA rerouted everything. He stared at me like I'd said something insane. They what? Who authorized that? Karen Whitmore, I said, pointing at her. She's the HOA president. Karen turned, her face pale and furious. That's not true. This man is lying. The firefighter twisted the valve again, bone dry. The line sagged to the ground like a dead snake. We got nothing here, another shouted. They scrambled to pull the engine closer to the lake for suction drafting, but the slope was steep, and the pumps took precious minutes to set up. Meanwhile, the clubhouse roof caved in with a roaring crack that sent sparks into the treetops. Residents screamed. Someone yelled that their car was trapped in the parking lot. Another shouted that their kid's asthma inhaler was inside. Chaos spread like the fire itself, fast, loud, and merciless. I ran toward the utility panel I'd warned about weeks ago. The metal door was open again, half melted now, wires hissing like snakes. The air smelled of burning insulation and chemical smoke. That's where it had started, electrical failure, just like I'd predicted. "Get everyone back," I yelled to two firefighters. "That panel's still live." One of them nodded, yanked a breaker stick from the truck, and hit the main cutoff. Sparks shot out like fireworks before the buzzing finally died. Corinne stumbled toward me, coughing, mascara streaking down her face. "You did this," she gasped. "You wanted this to happen so you could be right." I stared at her, almost pitying her. "No, Corinne, you did this when you ignored every warning." She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, the front glass wall of the clubhouse exploded outward, a blast of flame forcing everyone to duck. For a moment, everything was light, blinding orange, white heat, and roaring noise. Then the world dimmed again, replaced by shouting, sirens, and the rush of feet. By the time backup engines from the next town arrived, it was too late. The fire had consumed the clubhouse and jumped to two nearby homes. The lake reflected it all, a perfect, shimmering mirror of destruction. I helped direct people away, helped the crews run suction hoses from the water line, helped anyone I could. But the truth was, we were fighting a losing battle. The whole place was designed to burn beautifully, just like she said. Hours later, when the fire finally died, the ground still smoked. Ash floated like gray snow through the air. The firefighters were exhausted, covered in soot, their voices hoarse. One of them, the lieutenant from earlier, came over and dropped his helmet beside me. "You said they capped the hydrants," he said. "Yeah," I replied quietly. "They did it for the view." He shook his head in disbelief. "I've seen a lot of dumb decisions, but this takes it." Corinne sat on the curb a few feet away, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the ashes of her empire. No one went near her, not the neighbors, not the board members. Everyone knew this was her doing. When the sun came up, Willow Creek didn't look like a luxury community anymore. It looked like a cautionary tale. And for me, standing there with smoke-stained hands, I knew one thing: this wasn't over. The fire might have burned the clubhouse, but it also lit something else: the truth. Because now there'd be an investigation. And this time, Corinne wasn't going to talk her way out of it. The morning after the fire felt like waking up inside someone else's nightmare. Smoke still hung low over the lake, drifting across the charred remains of what used to be the HOA Clubhouse. The once polished sign that read Willow Creek Estates, a community of pride, now leaned sideways, half melted. I stood on the edge of the property line, hands in my pockets, watching as fire marshals picked through the rubble. The smell of burnt plastic and wood clung to everything. You could taste it in the air. Neighbors gathered in clusters, whispering, eyes darting toward Corinne every few seconds like she was some kind of fallen queen. Corinne herself sat in a folding chair near the ashes, a blanket around her shoulders, sunglasses on even though the sun hadn't fully risen. She looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. The HOA board members stood awkwardly behind her, the same people who'd laughed when I brought up the hydrant issue months ago. Not one of them said a word now. A white pickup rolled up with county emblems on the door. Out stepped Fire Marshal O'Reilly, a big man with a gray mustache and a clipboard under his arm. He scanned the wreckage, then pointed toward me. "You're the one who made those maintenance reports, right?" "That's me," I said. He motioned me over, walked me through what happened last night. I told him everything: the flicker of orange, the hydrants, the dry lines, the capped valves, even the emails I'd sent. He didn't interrupt once, just scribbled notes and nodded grimly. When I finished, he let out a slow breath. "You're saying the HOA removed their fire hydrants on purpose?" "They didn't just remove them," I said. "They rerouted the main line through decorative landscaping, claimed it was for aesthetics and cost savings." O'Reilly rubbed his jaw. "You can't just shut off municipal fire lines. That's illegal under county code." Corinne must have overheard, because she suddenly stood up and marched over, her voice shaky but loud enough for everyone to hear. "This was an accident. We followed the approved community plan." O'Reilly turned to her, cool as ice. "Ma'am, was that plan reviewed by the county fire department?" She hesitated. "It was discussed." "Discussed," he repeated, "or approved?" Her silence said everything. By noon, county inspectors, insurance adjusters, and even 2 sheriff's deputies were on site. The clubhouse was declared a total loss. Damage estimate, over $2 million, and that didn't include the 2 houses scorched by flying embers. The fire report came in fast: electrical malfunction in the utility panel. The same panel I'd warned about 6 months ago, the same one Karen dismissed as aesthetic clutter. Word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People who had defended her were suddenly whispering different things. She ignored maintenance. She cut corners. She wanted the new fountain more than safety. By late afternoon, the HOA email group was chaos. Residents were demanding answers. One message read, "If the hydrants had worked, maybe our homes would still be standing." Another simply said, "Karen needs to resign." Karen responded with a wall of text, blaming the contractor, the fire department, even me, accusing me of creating panic and sabotaging the HOA's efforts to beautify the community. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. O'Reilly had already asked me to send him copies of every email, every photo, every inspection notice. I did all 27 of them. The next morning, I got a call from the county attorney's office. They wanted a statement. I wasn't surprised. I'd seen enough government work to know how this goes. Once the insurance company gets involved, they start sniffing around for liability. And in this case, there was plenty to go around. A few days later, they held an emergency HOA meeting at the temporary office inside the community center. Everyone showed up, even residents who hadn't been to a meeting in years. The place was packed, standing room only. Karen tried to start with her usual charm, thanking everyone for their patience during this challenging time. But the crowd wasn't having it. A man in the back shouted, "You got rid of the hydrants, Karen. My garage burned because of you." Another woman yelled, "You raised our dues for landscaping and took away our safety." The room erupted. Karen banged her gavel, but her voice cracked. "We were following the budget guidelines." "Whose budget?" someone shouted. "Yours." Then O'Reilly walked in. The entire room went silent. He looked around, then said calmly, "I've concluded my initial investigation. The fire was accidental, but the response delay was due to non-functional fire hydrants that were deliberately capped and removed by the HOA without county approval." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen's hand tightened on the table. O'Reilly continued, "That's a violation of County Code 14.5b. Whoever authorized it could face civil and potentially criminal liability." The silence that followed was heavier than smoke. Karen tried to stand, but her knees buckled. One of the board members caught her arm. "This meeting's over," she muttered. But it was, not by a long shot, because the next day a notice went up on every mailbox in Willow Creek, county investigation pending. HOA operations temporarily suspended. For the first time, the neighborhood didn't feel like Karen's kingdom anymore. It felt like people were waking up. And me, I wasn't celebrating yet, because I knew the next step was the worst part of all. When people realize the truth, they start looking for someone to blame. And I had a feeling Karen wasn't done blaming me just yet. By the time the county's notice hit every mailbox in Willow Creek, Karen had gone from humiliated to furious. The woman who once strutted around in pastel blazers and pearls now looked like someone cornered by her own reflection. But if I'd learned one thing about her, it was this: Karen never admitted defeat. She turned it into a crusade. 3 days after the notice, I woke up to find a thick envelope taped to my front door. It had the HOA logo on it, even though the board had been officially suspended. Inside was a single sheet of paper: cease and desist. Defamation, harassment, and interference with community operations. I almost laughed out loud. She was threatening to sue me while under county investigation. Classic Karen move. My wife, Lydia, read it over my shoulder and sighed. "She's not giving up, is she?" "Nope," I said, tossing it on the kitchen table. "But this time she picked the wrong fight." Later that afternoon, I got a call from Fire Marshal O'Reilly. He sounded more serious than usual. "We went through the HOA's maintenance contracts," he said. You might want to sit down for this." He explained that 6 months before the fire, the HOA had signed a contract with a landscaping company, the same one Karen's brother-in-law owned. They billed the community over $120,000 for beautification improvements. On the invoices, there was one curious line item: fire line relocation and hydrant removal. "So she paid her family to remove the hydrants," I said slowly. "That's what it looks like," he replied. "And since she didn't file for county approval, that's not just negligence, that's fraud." For a moment, I just sat there, gripping the phone. I'd suspected corruption, but hearing it confirmed made my stomach twist. O'Reilly continued, "The county attorney's office is building a case. We'll need your statements again and your testimony if it goes to court." "Whatever you need," I told him. "I'm done watching her get away with this." But Karen wasn't sitting quietly. That same week, she called for a private neighborhood meeting at her house. Half the residents showed up, thinking it was some kind of update. The next morning, my phone started buzzing nonstop. "She said you were the one who tipped off the county," one neighbor told me. "She's telling people you tampered with the hydrants yourself," another said. I stood in my driveway, jaw clenched. She was spinning the story faster than a PR firm. That evening, I walked into the local diner to grab coffee and overheard two men from the community whispering in a booth. "I heard the guy by the lake wanted the clubhouse gone," one said. "Insurance payout or something." That was the breaking point. I got up, walked over, and said calmly, "You heard wrong." They froze, muttered apologies, and left their food half-eaten. But the damage was done. Karen's rumor campaign was working. That night, Lydia sat across from me at the dining table. "You need to be careful," she said softly. "She's desperate. People like her don't fight fair." "I know," I said, "but she's not the only one who knows how to dig." The next morning, I paid a visit to the county records office. After a few hours of searching through permit archives, I found something odd: a variance approval dated 2 years ago, bearing Karen's signature. It authorized a non-fire utility reroute, but the signature of the county inspector was forged. I compared it to a real document from the same official. The handwriting didn't even come close. I took photos and called O'Reilly again. "I found something you'll want to see," I told him. He met me in person that evening. When I handed him the photos, he whistled low. "Forgery, that's a felony." "Can we prove it's her?" I asked. "Oh, we will," he said. "She left a paper trail a mile wide." The following week, county investigators executed a search warrant at the HOA office, Karen's temporary command center. The entire neighborhood stood behind yellow tape as officers carried out boxes of files and computers. Karen stood on her porch watching, arms crossed, jaw tight. Someone whispered, "She's done for." But she was not yet. That night, I got another letter, this time from her lawyer, a full-page threat to sue for defamation of character and financial damages. I didn't even finish reading it. Instead, I forwarded it to the county attorney. 2 days later, the news broke publicly. The local paper ran the headline: HOA president under investigation for fire code violations and fraud. The article named Karen directly. It quoted residents. It even mentioned the missing hydrants. By the next morning, she was a pariah. People crossed the street to avoid her. The same neighbors who once praised her leadership now whispered behind her back. But as satisfying as it was to see the truth come out, part of me knew this story wasn't over. Because people like Karen, they don't vanish quietly. And I was right. That night, as I was locking up the front door, I noticed something on my porch, a small plastic hydrant ornament, melted at the top. No note, no words, just that. Lydia saw it and froze. "Is that a threat?" I looked out into the darkness, past the porch light to the edge of the lake. "No," I said slowly, "it's a warning." And I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming, something she wasn't done with yet. The next few days felt like living under a slow-moving storm. The investigation had turned Karen's empire into dust, but she wasn't backing down. Every morning, she drove her shiny white SUV through the neighborhood like nothing had changed, chin high, sunglasses on, pretending not to notice the looks, the whispers, or the yellow tape still wrapped around what used to be the clubhouse. But beneath that performance, something darker was brewing. I could feel it. One evening, I caught her standing across the road from my house, staring straight at me through the fog. She didn't move, didn't say a word, just stood there for a full minute before turning away. Lydia saw her too and whispered, "She's unraveling." I nodded, and desperate people do stupid things. The following morning, the county attorney called me in for a formal deposition. The case had expanded beyond fire code violations. They were now investigating possible embezzlement and forgery. I spent 2 hours giving my statement, recounting every detail from the hydrant removals to the false permits. When it was over, the attorney leaned forward and said, "Mr. Lawson, I think it's only a matter of time before Ms. Whitmore faces charges. But I need you to be careful. She's been contacting board members trying to adjust their statements." Adjust, that was a polite way to say threaten. Sure enough, that night, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice came through cold, calm, too composed. "You've made a mistake, Mark." "Funny," I said. "That's what the fire inspector told you." She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "You think this is over. The county's not your friend. They'll find someone to blame, and it's going to be you. You were the one who warned them about the wiring. You were the last one near that panel. I've got witnesses who saw you that night." "You're lying," I said, my pulse quickening. "Am I?" she whispered. "Watch how fast they turn on you once they realize the insurance payout depends on negligence." Then the line went dead. I stood there in the kitchen, phone still pressed to my ear, feeling the air drain out of the room. Lydia stepped in, saw my face, and frowned. "What happened?" "She's trying to flip the story," I said. "She's going to blame me for the fire." The next morning, I found a notice pinned to my mailbox, a police summons. Karen had filed a complaint, accusing me of tampering with community utilities. It was nonsense, but it meant one thing. She was pulling every string she had left. I showed up at the station, answered every question, handed over all my emails and photos. The detective nodded sympathetically. "Don't worry," he said. "We've seen this before. People like her dig their own graves." When I walked out, the sun was setting, and that's when I saw it. Karen's car was parked across the street, engine running. She rolled down her window and gave me a slow smile. "Enjoy your 15 minutes, Mark," she said. "It's almost over." I didn't respond, I just kept walking. 2 nights later, everything unraveled for her. At around 9 p.m., I got a call from O'Reilly. "We've got something," he said. "You might want to come down to the fire site." When I arrived, he and 2 deputies were standing by what remained of the clubhouse foundation. They'd found something buried under the collapsed section of the utility panel, a locked metal box, half melted but still intact. Inside were financial ledgers, handwritten notes, and receipts from the landscaping company, including bank transfers to Karen's personal account. The proof of everything. O'Reilly flipped through the charred pages. "She kept the evidence on site," he muttered. "She really thought she was untouchable." The next morning, sheriff's deputies arrived at her home. The whole neighborhood gathered behind their curtains as they let her out in handcuffs. No words, no gavel, no speeches, just the sound of the cuffs clicking shut. Lydia stood beside me on the porch, whispering. After everything she did, she finally got caught. But as the cruiser pulled away, I saw her turn her head just enough to look back at me. Her eyes weren't full of fear or shame, they were full of hatred. And I knew that even if she was going to jail, she'd never forgive me for what happened. The news spread fast. Within hours, the story hit local TV. Reporters swarmed the gates of Willow Creek. Cameras panned across the burned clubhouse and the empty hydrant caps. The anchor's voice echoed through every living room. HOA president arrested for fraud and negligence after community fire. That night, the neighborhood was eerily quiet. No sprinklers, no gossip, no Karen, just the sound of crickets and the lake rippling under moonlight. I sat on my porch again, the same place where it had all started, the night I'd seen that first flicker of orange. But this time, there was something different in the air. Not peace, not closure. Just silence. Because when something burns down, whether it's a building, a reputation, or a neighborhood, it doesn't just end with ashes. It ends with the question no one wants to ask. What happens next? And as I stared across the lake at the blackened remains of the clubhouse, I realized the answer might not be as simple as justice. Sometimes the fire doesn't stop when the flames die. Sometimes it keeps burning inside the people left behind. Weeks passed, but the smell of smoke never really left Willow Creek. It clung to the trees, to the water, to the conversations people whispered on their porches. Even though the fire trucks were long gone and the clubhouse was just a pile of rubble fenced off with yellow tape, the neighborhood didn't feel the same. Corinne's arrest had been the headline for nearly a week. The news vans camped outside the front gates finally disappeared, but her name lingered like a bad taste. Some neighbors still refused to talk about it. Others couldn't stop. Every morning, the HOA email group lit up with debates about what should happen next. "Should we dissolve the HOA completely?" one neighbor wrote. "Or rebuild with a new board?" another replied. Then someone added, "Maybe we should just ask Mark. He warned us all along." That one caught me off guard. For months, I'd been the guy everyone avoided, the complainer, the one who didn't fit the community vibe. Now, suddenly, they were asking for my advice. The county eventually finished its report. It was brutal, a 40-page document detailing how the HOA had illegally removed hydrants, ignored safety warnings, and forged permits. Corinne faced multiple charges: fraud, forgery, obstruction, and criminal negligence. Her trial was set for the fall. But I didn't go to the courthouse the day she was arraigned. I didn't need to see her standing there in front of a judge. The truth was already out, and that was enough. Instead, I focused on rebuilding, not the clubhouse, but the neighborhood itself. We held the first community meeting without her in early spring. No luxury ballroom this time, no catered snacks or printed banners. Just a few folding chairs set up in someone's garage. The turnout surprised me. More than 50 people came. An older man named Robert stood up first. "I think we owe Mark an apology," he said, his voice steady but humble. "We should have listened when he warned us. We got too comfortable letting someone else make the rules." I didn't say anything right away. I wasn't looking for credit. I just looked around and saw faces I hadn't seen smile in months. For the first time, the meeting didn't feel like a power contest. It felt like neighbors actually talking. Someone suggested reinstating the hydrants. Another volunteered to help replant the burned area with native trees. A retired firefighter offered to lead safety drills once a year. For once, common sense had returned to Willow Creek. By summer, the lake looked alive again. The ashes had been cleared, and the grass started to grow where the clubhouse once stood. Kids rode their bikes on the old driveway, using the blackened concrete as a sort of makeshift playground. It was strange, life growing over something that had once been so ugly. One evening, I was out fixing the mailbox when a familiar car pulled up to the curb. It wasn't Corinne, at least, not directly. It was her daughter, Emily. She stepped out quietly, clutching an envelope. "I know you probably don't want to talk," she said softly, "but my mom asked me to give you this." I hesitated, then took it. "How's she holding up?" "She's different," Emily said. "Angry, but I think she's realizing what she did. She told me you were the only one who tried to stop her before it got this far." I nodded, not sure how to feel about that. After she left, I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note, short and uneven. "I thought control meant respect. I thought being right meant being safe. You were right, Mark. I was blind. I hope they rebuild what I broke without becoming like me." No apology, but maybe in her way that was one. I folded it and tucked it in my desk drawer. I didn't plan to tell anyone about it. Some things are better left quiet. A few weeks later, the new hydrants were installed, bright red and freshly painted, standing proud along the road. The fire department held a small demonstration for the residents, showing everyone how to use the emergency system. Kids clapped when the water shot into the air. Lydia squeezed my hand and smiled. "Looks like you finally got your wish," she said. "Not really," I said. "I just wanted people to listen before something burned." That night, I sat on the same porch where it all began, coffee in hand, watching the lights shimmer across the lake. The new hydrants gleamed under the street lamps, little reminders that sometimes it takes losing everything to make people see what really matters. The air was calm, peaceful for once. And as I looked out over the water, I realized something. The fire had changed more than just the neighborhood. It had burned away the fear, the ego, and the silence that let people like Karen thrive. Now what was left was something honest, maybe even hopeful. The community wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But at least now it had learned to fight for the right reasons, not for appearances, not for control, but for each other. And for me, that was enough. Because in Willow Creek, the flames had finally gone out, but the lesson they left behind was never going to fade. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one, the truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.